What's up, everyone? We are back with another Unpopular Cards episode, and this time it is thanks to a comment left by Timothy01, who recommended I cover unpopular 1-mana cards. I asked my Patron Council group what category I should do, and they decided to do 1-mana artifacts this time. I do actually read every comment, and if you look at my past 15, 20 videos, you can see that I respond to every comment, even if there are hundreds of them, and it takes hours. I do appreciate this community and the time you take to share your thoughts on my videos, so I want to reciprocate that. Our first card today is Glaring Spotlight, which is played in 14,709 decks. This says, creatures your opponents control with hexproof can be the target of spells and abilities you control as though they didn't have hexproof. You can then pay 3 to sacrifice this artifact. Creatures you control gain hexproof until end of turn and can't be blocked this turn. So this card has a few great things going for it. First of all, Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots are both in over 1.5 million decks each. So this can be helpful to remove huge threats that you'd otherwise not be able to kill or target without removing them via, let's say, a board wipe, which could also affect you. The activation ability is also super strong, one for the mass hexproof, but even more so, I think this card is insane in a combat-oriented deck, especially if you throw in extra combats or have a commander like Karlach, Fury of Avernus, that has those extra combats built in each turn. I'll be completely honest, I've read this card a lot, and I always totally forget about the second clause where your creatures can't be blocked this turn. I used to see it more for the mass hexproof, but the not being blocked can be a crazy game ender and fits in so many decks. Also, since the ability specifies that you are the only person who can target the creatures with hexproof, this does bring up some politics opportunities. So if someone has a big threat with Lightning Greaves, you could make a deal with them that you won't remove their commander or their big creature if they don't attack you with it. So the creature will still have hexproof against your other opponents. So if it is crucial to their game plan, that could be, a good deal for both of you. If they don't attack you, you let it live. I'm curious, if you have ever played this before, do you find yourself using the activation cost more for the mass hexproof or for the mass unblockability? Our next unpopular card today is Locket of Yesterdays, which is in 14,282 decks. This says, spells you play cost 1 less to play for each card with the same name as that spell in your graveyard. So yeah, this one is pretty self-explanatory, but there are so many decks that could benefit from this, and much more than 14,000, I'd say. Thrumming Stone is another card people use in decks that can have any number of cards, and it's in over 47,000 decks instead of 14,000. That one is a 5-mana instead of 1, and yeah, I know it says that you can cast them for free, but there's a chance to whiff, and I'm just making the comparison to show that the demand is there. There's decks playing these types of cards. So here's a few cards that could benefit from the cost reduction by going down to 1 mana instead of 2 or 3. So there's Dragon's Approach, which is normally 3, goes down to 1. Heir Apparent, Nazgul decks could go down to 1 each. There's Persistent Petitioners, Slime Against Humanity, Tempest Hawk is a new one, Templar Knight, 7 Dwarves, and Rat Colony. So the other ones are already either 1 mana or they have multiple colored pips, so the colorless cost reduction doesn't help as much. So if you run a deck with more than 1 copy of a card, then this is definitely a 1-mana artifact that you should look into. Next up is Voyager Staff, which is in 10,788 decks. So this one, you can pay 2 generic to sacrifice Voyager Staff and exile target creature. Return the exiled card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. This is also super simple, and it gives you access to blinking outside of blue and white decks. If you think of this in like an Atali Primal Conqueror deck, this is a very nice option because it is already on the battlefield for 1 mana, And then when Atali comes out, it will only be 2 mana to blink it at instant speed. So that there's a few benefits to this. One is the instant speed blinkability option. Another option that people often run in Gruul decks, like Atali as mentioned, are copy spells. So things like Molten Duplication, which cost 2 mana, but this can't be activated at instant speed and in response to a removal spell as well. So this doubles up as protection, not just for the ETB abuse, which you'll get anyways. It's a super underrated option for non-blue or non-white decks, and if you hold up the 2 mana, you can also threaten protection from board wipes or spot removal, or just crack it if you need it. Another underrated option or aspect of this is, unlike most white or blue blink cards, this lets you target any creature on the battlefield. So this can be used to save yourself against a big creature that's attacking you that maybe didn't realize that you can use this ability on opponent's creatures. If a creature doesn't have haste, this can be an insanely strong setback to make the opponent wait an entire turn cycle before it can attack again. And targeting opponent's creatures also opens it up to politics as well. So if there's a strong ability that is an ETB effect, then you could strike a deal with them to blink their creature to help out the board. And lastly, as a 1 mana artifact, this is very easy to recur. I know I mentioned clones in Atali, but I actually don't run or have an Atali deck. So I'm curious, what other blink options do people tend to run, or what have you really liked in Gruul colors? Up next is just a very fun one, if you ask me. It's Glasses of Urza, which is in 7,050 decks. This has a tap ability, and that lets you look at target player's hand. I remember back in the day so I started playing in 2009. This was before EDH really became mainstream, but I think it was telepathy in almost all of my blue decks back when I started playing. That was just when I'd play with my brother and cousin, and I remember them just groaning every time it came down. Now, I really haven't seen telepathy in years, and I know people tend to target the player who has it, but this artifact is a less salty version of telepathy because it only hits one person at a time, and it's only revealed to you, so the entire board isn't the one that's, they're not all seeing it. The other 2 strong use cases that come to mind when I see this is, one, if you are playing against a control deck. Knowing how many counterspells someone has in hand and what kinds of counters they have can be incredibly helpful, especially if people are really good at, poker face. They hold up some mana. You don't know, are they bluffing? Are they not? You just tap this for free and oh, yeah, I'm safe to play this. They have 0 counterspells in hand. Another instance that this could be a really great use for is in commit a crime decks. So commanders like Gisa the Hellraiser, Marchesa Diller of Death, and Magda the Hordemaster. Put this down for 1 mana, then you have a free crime committer for every turn cycle for the rest of the game if it doesn't get removed. You play this in Magda, you put this down turn 1, you play Magda the Hordemaster turn 2, you tap this for free, and you already are creating treasures. This also works well with cards that look at a player's hand because it lets you know what player you should attack or have, that perfect information. For example, you could also fetch the creature in Asperia the Inscrutable. You also know which opponent you should target or attack with something like Zara Renegade Recruiter to steal the best creature in people's hands, or even something like Send Triplets to know what cards you want to access and what opponent to target. So the fact that this is a 1 mana artifact and it doesn't have mana cost associated to the tap ability honestly feels really strong to me, and I think a lot better than people give it credit for. It's funny, Asperia was actually my first commander ever. Curious, who was your first commander that you ever made a deck for? Before we get into our next card, we're actually going to do our monthly Patron Giveaway. And this month, I'll be giving away a Double Masters 2022 Collector Booster Pack for free. I give away a Collector Booster every month as a thank you to patrons. So let's shuffle this a couple times and spin, and let's see who wins. Huge congrats to Ethel Payne on the free Collector Booster win. I really appreciate you for being a patron. I'll email you for the shipping details, and yeah, congrats again. Our next unpopular artifact is Profane Memento, which is in 8,327 decks. This card says, whenever a creature card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, you gain 1 life. So, yeah, a few things that I want to clarify about this card. Unfortunately, it doesn't work with creature tokens as they are not creature cards. So that is a big nerf to what would be a very good life gain ability. But this doesn't say, whenever one or more creatures. So this is one of those cards that can get a ton of individual life triggers if you are playing a deck that cares about maximizing the amount of life gain triggers as opposed to the total amount of life that you gain. So commanders like Amalia Benavides Aguirre or Dina Soulsteeper, Karlov of the Ghost Council, Trelasara Moondancer, or Heliod Suncrowned can all get a ton of triggers from this card. Another nice thing is this says from anywhere. So if you're playing a mill deck, whenever you mill someone for, let's say, half their library, you could literally get like 10 to 20 individual life gain triggers, depending on the amount of creature cards that are being put into their graveyard from their library. Another really nice thing about this card is that it is an artifact, so unlike Soul Warden or other creatures that need to be on the battlefield to get the life gain triggers, this works if you cast a board wipe. If you have an indestructible creature or a non-creature card that cares about the number of triggers from the board wipe, that could be a very strong play. Just put a ton of counters, let's say, on Heliod. Maybe you don't have the amount of white to make him into a creature, but he does have a ton of counters on it. So the durability coupled with the cheap CMC and the number of ways a creature card could be put into a graveyard from either self-mill, your mill, surveilling, or aristocrat cards could be, a very surprising amount of life over the course of a game. Next up, we have Pyramid of the Pantheon, which is played in 5,701 decks. This artifact lets you pay 2 to tap it to add 1 mana of any color and put a brick counter on this artifact. The second ability says, tap, add 3 mana of any 1 color. Activate only if there are 3 or more brick counters on this artifact. So this is one of the more, I'd say, niche cards in this video, but it also has a great ceiling for a 1 mana artifact in the decks that can take advantage of it. So in any deck, this card is a mana fixer, but a very inefficient one. Think of it kind of like if you ever have used a Conduit Pylons or a Crystal Grotto, where you invest 2 lands to return 1 mana of the color you want. It's kind of what this is. It's not preferred. But of course, the decks that can really do well with this are decks that use a lot of proliferate effects. You activate the ability once to get the first brick counter on it, then hopefully you can proliferate as part of your deck to get your next 2 counters on it, and you don't have to use that first ability anymore. You just tap it once, you get that. With maybe something like Tekuthal Inquiry Dominus on the board, you only need to proliferate once, and you're literally set for the rest of the game. I'm curious if this card in particular will see an increase at all in price with the new Jeskai commander that's coming out that proliferates whenever it taps. That's literally going to be insane. And so, yeah, this is one that I'm going to be on the lookout for to see if the price does increase. Maybe it's still a little inefficient, but in the right decks, for 1 mana, getting this to tap for 3, it could be a high ceiling. Our next unloved artifact card is Giant's Amulet, which is played in 5,323 decks. So this one is an equipment that costs 1 blue to cast, and it says, when this equipment enters, you may pay 3 and a blue. If you do, create a 4/4 blue giant wizard creature token, then attach this equipment to it. Equipped creature gets +0/+1 and this creature has hexproof as long as it is untapped. And the equip cost is 2. So this card has 2 abilities. I'm not really highlighting it so much for the first one that creates a wizard token, but I mean, don't get me wrong. That is a very nice ability, and it adds, a little bit of scaling to this card. So if you draw this in the late game, there's a little more that you can do with it than, let's say, something like a Swiftfoot Boots, which is the only artifact. It's only an artifact, but this one can create a 4/5 giant for 5 mana as a decent blocker. The reason why I am including this is more for the second ability, which is an underrated protection card for commanders with blue in their identity. I don't play a ton of combat-oriented commanders with blue in it, so my commanders are usually the engine as opposed to the win con tapping it for, combat or anything like that. For example, I have an Emoti Celebrant of Bounty deck. It's one of my favorites. It's one of the first that I created when I got back, and that deck really needs Emoti to stay alive on the battlefield in order for the deck to do some crazy stuff. It is a 3/1, so I will die to literally any weenie blocker. So I don't mind keeping this untapped for the hexproof. I'm not really planning on attacking with it very much. And I think this applies to a lot more blue commanders than, it seems. Like Talrand Sky Summoner is an easy example. You play Talrand for the ability, not the stat line. So it's not really a huge setback if you're not swinging with them. Also, if you have mutate decks, this could be an inclusion protect your mutate stack. I actually stopped playing Magic for quite a long time, so I wasn't around when Call Time was released, but I've heard that Paradise Druid was a pretty popular mutate target because of the conditional hexproof ability. I don't know if anyone can confirm that, but curious, if there are any other commanders that come to mind that this would be a good inclusion for, where you don't really care if you're attacking with them, so the hexproof clause is really helpful. Okay, we have 3 more. Our next card is Tricksters Talisman, which is in 2,798 decks. This is another equipment that costs 1 blue and 2 to equip. It says, equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has, whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, you may sacrifice Trickster's Talisman. If you do, create a token that's a copy of this creature. So I used to play this to great effect in Brutaclad decks. You put this down on turn 1, and then it's there to equip for just 2 mana on any other turn. I like this because it gives you the ability to turn any creature into a token to then be copied by Brutaclad or literally any other copy or token deck you're running. Yes, you do need to get through in order to make the copy, but there's so many evasive cards and creatures these days that there's usually at least one person, that you can get an open attack on. Other commanders that use this are Arna Kennerud, Sky Captain, Myriad Sentinel Worm is another one of the top ones, Volo Guide to Monsters, Adrix and Nev Twincasters, and Cradle of Baldur's Gate. Or maybe you have a commander with an insane ETB, and you just want to make a copy of them for the ETB effect, and then keep the original. So yeah, pretty simple effect, but it's cheap, and yeah, I've used this and I like this card. Our next artifact is Skyblinder Staff, which is in 1,744 decks. This says equipped creature gets +1/+0 and can't be blocked by creatures with flying. Equip 3. There's not much to this, but the way that I see this is like a underrated and much less popular version of Trailblazer's Boots for any commander that has flying. So Trailblazer's Boots is played in over 117,000 total decks, and these days it's pretty much a sure way to deal combat damage to any opponent with the number of non-basic lands people will play. I mean, any deck that has a mana that taps for 2 mana colors, like blue and green, you're getting through. Trailblazer's Boots costs 2 and has a 2 mana equip cost, while this one costs 1 and has a 3 mana equip and also gives a tiny +1 buff. Like I said, if your commander has flying and it can't be blocked by creatures with flying, then this means that it can only be blocked by creatures with reach, which is much more uncommon to see than, creatures with flying, if you ask me. There isn't one single commander that plays this a ton, with the most played commander being EDHREC, the Blight Dragon, which is only in 59 decks. But if you play a deck with flying commanders or creatures like a ton of dragons, and you want to win with combat or have some fun combat damage effects, then yeah, this is a very budget option that pretty much makes sure that your flyers will be able to connect with someone. Our last card of the video is a very simple one. It's Triangle of War, which sees play in 654 decks. This costs 1 generic, and for 2 generic, you can sacrifice this artifact, and target creature you control fights target creature an opponent controls. Yeah, I mean, Fight is a very nice mechanic in green decks that don't have access to traditional removal, but this can also be played in any deck, and the threat is, they're looming for everyone to see, so they may play more careful. I'm also like a big Fight mechanic fan, in particular with keywords like Death Touch and Lifelink. I actually made a video a little while back with a deck tech around Tulsamir Midnight's Light, where you get a ton of life with Fight and Bite spells on your buffed commander. I mean, one Fight spell with a commander can activate the majority of cards that give you a creature token or a payoff for gaining 3 or more life in a turn. This one in particular is played in decks like Glisa the Traitor and Shelob Child of Ungoliant. But unlike so many Fight spells, this can be activated at instant speed as opposed to sorcery speed. So that is another thing that I like about this. And maybe another use case would be something like an Enrage deck to guarantee that you get some Enrage ability activations online in a turn. But yeah, that's everything that I had for this video. Let me know in the comments below what you think and what topics you'd like me to post about next. I respond, like I said, to every comment, and after a few days, I will pin a comment and it will become a video. So thanks so much everyone for watching, and we'll see you next time.